Palestina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I-24 News.
Hello, welcome. You're watching I-24 News, coming to you live from Tel Aviv. Israel's war cabinet is meeting to discuss the fallout from a US decision to withhold military aid over the IDF operation in Rafah. Israeli leaders have issued defiant statements following the move, including the Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. We can take a listen to him now.
I say from here to Israel's enemies and its best friends, the state of Israel cannot be subdued. Not the IDF, not the defense ministry, not the defense establishment, not the state of Israel. We will stand. We will achieve our goals. We will hit Hamas. We will destroy Hezbollah, and we will bring security.
Well, for the very latest, we're joined now by our senior US correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, over in New York. Mike, that's some of the reaction here in Israel. There's also been significant reaction where you are as well.
Yeah, it set off a firestorm, these comments and confirmation from President Joe Biden that he's withholding these bombs from Israel in fear over concern that they'll be used in a way in Rafah that is contrary to American dictates at this point in time. And even from Biden's own Democratic Party, not just pro-Israel stalwarts, but middle-of-the-road members of Congress as well, expressing concern, saying, listen, you just browbeat Congress for not getting Israel aid done. We worked day and night, worked on a bipartisan way in order to provide this much-needed aid to Israel. And now you're saying, whether it was part of that package or some previous package, now Israel can't use it. There's just a real confusion as to what exactly the president's line here is and why he's taking this particular tack at this point in time. Keep in mind as well, you know, this is not unprecedented in American history. President Reagan did the same thing during the Lebanon War, withholding certain artillery from Israel, but that was over concerns that it had already been used improperly. This is not what the Biden administration is talking about at this point in time. It's almost a preemptive measure, which is setting off alarm bells as well within Congress, saying, well, what exactly are the lines here, and are they clearly defined? And if not, how can we rely on our allies to use the weaponry in a way that, it was licensed to use it? So this is just in the beginning stages. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson expressed dismay already this morning, said he was told specifically by Biden administration officials in private briefings earlier this week that this was not being done, that these bombs were not being withheld. Now confusion for him as well as to what he was told was a lie, misinformation, disinformation. A lot to be cleared up here by the Biden admin, and demands are coming pretty quickly that they do it.
Mike, thank you very much indeed. Mike Wagenheim there over in New York. Well, with me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman-Landa is a former member of the Knesset, the former co-chair of the Abraham Accords Caucus, and the former diplomatic envoy in Cairo. Good evening to you, Ruth. I'm also joined by Yaakov Lapin, a strategic and military analyst at the Miriam Institute, the Alma Center, and the Jewish News Syndicate. Good to see you, Yaakov, as well. So, Ruth, what the US is doing is holding back not defensive equipment. President Biden says the United States will not withhold any means for Israel to defend itself, but we're talking about smart bombs, precision missiles, that kind of thing. What will be the immediate consequence of this?
First of all, militarily, there won't be consequences in terms of the ability to enter Rafah or not enter Rafah, but that's on a tactical level. This kind of use of a condition is, it's not unprecedented, but it's very difficult, let's say, reminder to Israel that the United States can withhold weapons, can have some kind of leverage, and is unpleased. I do like to remind whoever is watching us at the moment that we are in a defensive war, a war that not Israel chose to begin with, but rather has responded, tried and attempted to prevent anything like October 7th to happen again. And one of the last places that the IDF has not entered into is, in fact, the Rafah area of Gaza. And this is something that unfortunately allowed many of the Hamas operatives and the terrorists to put themselves right there, along with the hostages, most probably. And this is a problem. This is something that Israel needs to tackle.
And Yaakov Lapid, I mean, the Americans have been saying for a long time now, you go into Rafah, there will be consequences. Did Israel just not do a good enough job of explaining its intentions and coming up with that famous plan of getting the refugees, the civilians, out of Rafah?
Israel presented its operational plans to the White House for months. And it's already conducted this kind of evacuation in the past successfully in Gaza City. The White House was not the least bit surprised that Israel is interested in going to Rafah. What it's doing, I think, is one of two things. First of all, it's trying to put pressure on Israel to agree to a very bad current hostage deal that's on the table, that Hamas's counteroffer. I think the White House is trying to push Israel to accept that, and this is the leverage that they're applying. Now, this deal would lead essentially to Hamas retaking the Gaza Strip, surviving the war and retaking the Gaza Strip. And so we see that the War Cabinet, whatever else it may disagree on, it agrees that it cannot accept this. And that's why we're seeing very strong statements. And if this continues, then essentially what the White House is doing is threatening the readiness of Israel not to deal with Hamas and what's left of Hamas and Rafah, but actually the northern arena where Israel needs to continue to stockpile a lot of munitions to deal with the threat of Hezbollah. If this kind of unofficial weapons embargo continues, that's going to negatively harm Israel's readiness regarding the north. That's a painful pressure point, and it's a very severe situation that the White House feels that it can apply this kind of pressure point against Israel as Israel pursues its vital security interests.
Ruth, you're a former diplomat. I mean, is it time for Israel to diversify its allies? Does Israel need to look further afield so it doesn't have this kind of leverage held over it when it is in times of crisis?
First of all, the United States of America is a very important and strategic partner to Israel and has been for many years. And one needs to take that into account, to maintain that, to respectfully look at it. But as the United States very often has said to Israel as well, friends may disagree. It's just that at a time when Israel is really facing an existential threat, and I must agree with my colleague here, not only is the hostage deal, if one can call it a hostage deal, it's rather a hostage manipulation by Hamas. And there are the absolute kings of manipulation. They can teach manipulation at the wonderful Ivy League universities that have accepted them and embraced them so beautifully throughout the United States. When we are talking about allowing for the conditions that they themselves had put on the table, which has absolutely nothing to do with the actual agreed upon deal that was negotiated prior by Egypt, they actually mean that there will be thousands of murderous Hamas getting out of the Israeli prisons and in fact going back not only to the Gaza Strip but also to the West Bank, meaning that de facto they are making them kings of the West Bank as well, not only in the Gaza Strip but also in the West Bank. So bye-bye to Abu Mazen and the Fatah, whom the United States is currently supporting.
They wanted to revitalize Palestinian Authority?
Absolutely, they're going to make them the kings of all of so-called Palestine in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And must I remind anyone that the West Bank is literally 5 minutes from undisputed Israeli cities and towns in the northern part of the Sharon area. And what happened on October 7th can easily happen again just a couple of minutes from there.
Yaakov, let's talk about what's happening in Rafah. The IDF says 50 gunmen have been killed in the east of Rafah, 150,000 civilians out of 1.5 million evacuated already. The IDF has been in control of the Rafah crossing for, what, 48 hours now? Just give us a sense of what's happening and how this might proceed.
It's gradually closing in on the Hamas leadership, but the emphasis here is gradually. It looks like this plan, the Rafah operation, is essentially designed to allow each stage to enable the war cabinet to either hit the pause button to see where the hostage talks are, to take the pulse of negotiations. And we saw that happening just now. The Israeli negotiations team is now just coming back from Cairo, reportedly. So they did hit the pause button. But when they see that nothing is happening, when they see that Hamas continues to make its demands, essentially calling for Israel's surrender, that's what Hamas is calling for, then they continue. And we saw this morning a very unusual statement by the IDF spokesperson unit talking about how Division 99 has moved into new areas of central Gaza. So we see that the operation is being expanded, not necessarily in Rafah right now, but in central Gaza. But I would expect that the next step of this, if negotiations remain stuck, is for Israel to continue to bring up the pressure on the Hamas leadership by expanding its operation in Rafah. The fact that 150,000 civilians have left means that they're listening to the IDF, and Gazan civilians leaving means that human shields are being stripped away from Hamas, and that's definitely something that Hamas does not want to see.
Right, that is the exact opposite of what Hamas wants, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because part of its strategy is to cause as many civilian casualties as possible, get more pressure from Israel's allies, and we're seeing that play out now, aren't we?
That's right. 100%. So, look, Hamas, is actually, their strategy is to recruit everybody and everything to pressure Israel into accepting its terms for surrender. That's essentially how I see the bottom line of this situation. Unfortunately, they've also been able to recruit the White House for this goal, and that's a terrible observation. And I don't think it's done out of malice. I think it's done because the White House mistakenly believes that it needs to now put the lid on this conflict to make this conflict go away. It's worried about a regional war that the United States can get sucked into. There are elections considerations. So there's a whole host of reasons why the Americans view their interest in ways that are very different right now from how Israel views its interests. So there's a clash of interests. There's no way to sugarcoat it. That's what's being played out right now.
Okay, all right. Well, the latest round of talks have apparently ended in Cairo. The CIA chief Bill Burns has gone back to Washington, and the Hamas delegation has gone back to Doha. Let's go down to Hostage Square in Tel Aviv. Natasha Kurchuk is there for us yet again. Natasha, another round of talks has collapsed. We hear you, Natasha. Yep, you're on with us now, Natasha. Extraordinary pressure again on the families of the hostages. What's happening down there?
Hi, Laura. So I've been speaking with the families of the hostages throughout the day, and what we're hearing essentially is despair. These families are completely distressed. They feel that they have nobody to turn to anymore. Earlier, I spoke with Rotem Cooper, the son of 85-year-old hostage Amiram Cooper. His mother was released 17 days after also being taken hostage, but his father has now been there for over 216 days. And what he essentially said to me is that he feels that the Israeli Prime Minister and the War Cabinet has let his family down, that they could have been doing a lot more to ensure that at least the civilians were released in a hostage exchange deal. And he feels that the decision to now enter Rafah is only going to hurt the chances to see his loved one returned alive at this point. I also spoke earlier in the evening with another son of a hostage who has been held for 260 days, Ishal Lifshitz. His mother, Yocheved, was released after 17 days, and his father, Oded, is turning 84 years old tomorrow after being held in captivity for 214 days. Here's a little bit of what he had to say to me.
It's something that I don't know if my father is alive, because he's old man, 84 years old, is not hell. And for me, it's like, I don't know how to say it, but I'm very hungry because this number, but also I'm so hungry about the Muslims because my father is 84 years old. He's not a prisoner. He's not a soldier. What is it now? Why don't they take him and give it to me? Why they ask for prisoners or stuff like this? This is something that is not. This is something that is. It's not human. This is what I mean. And if we deal with them, it looks bad. If the Qatarian deal with them, if Ania deal with them, if Sinwar done it. So what is the idea here? That you can kidnap 84 years old man and deal with him like a meat? So this is what I'm thinking about it. It's nothing about my government. It's about the Muslims, because we have a lot of Muslims here in Israel, Bedouin, and a lot of them. And how can they support this kind of process? I don't know.
Do you think that the government is making it a priority to see the hostages released at this point?
I think they don't have a choice now, because they try to finish the war, and they want also all the soldiers, and Hamas say, okay, you go back to Israel with all the tanks, and all the IDF go out borders.
So, Laura, you could hear a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of despair from these families. The question now is if we're going to see any movement forward in negotiations. That doesn't seem to be happening. We obviously saw Hamas leave Cairo, head back to Doha. We also have seen the Israeli delegation make its way back to Israel from Cairo. So far, no steps forward. And now we're just waiting to see if there's any chance that there could be some type of breakthrough in the coming days.
Absolutely excruciating time for the families of the hostages. Natasha, thank you. Natasha Krichuk there. Well, Ruth Wasserman-Land and Yaakov Lapin are with me in the studio. And Ruth, it's become this horrendous debate here in Israel, hasn't it? Almost presented as a choice, save the hostages or finish off Hamas. Israel has always said from the beginning it must achieve both. There was a poll out recently which said more Israelis want a deal than an operation in Rafah, quite a limited choice. I mean, was it the right thing to go into Rafah at that time, especially?
I think that Israel is in a situation in which, I wish I could say something different, but there are not a whole row of amazing choices. There are several bad choices, and the decision makers, and again, I'm not belonging to the political party currently heading the government, and yet it is a difficult choice for any politician and any decision maker to make. The Hamas did what they did on October 7th in a premeditated, systematically evil manner, taking hostages in order to protect their own survival. That is exactly what they did. And unfortunately, while I think that there is a moral clarity about the necessity of doing everything to bring those hostages back home, one needs to understand that when we are negotiating, the son here that we interviewed before spoke about an 84-year-old father. We're talking about a 1-year-old baby and other civilians that if we give back prisoners who are murderers, who are rapists, who are have blood on their hands from our prisons in exchange for a baby, what does that say to Hamas over and above everything else that we're talking about? That next time they come in, they just grab any child on the street because that's their security. We need to take that into account. And yet the vast majority of the Israelis still support the government's doing everything it can to take those hostages out because we value life. We attach an importance to every single civilian. And it's really difficult to look into the eyes of those families that are undergoing excruciating pain and tell them, you know what? There's no one to talk to on the other side. It's a bunch of manipulative criminals that have taken those poor hostages for their own survival, and anything else means that they give up their own survival, which is something that mentality-wise seems very unlikely.
And Yaakov, I mean, negotiations are all about leverage and pressure, aren't they?
Yep.
There did appear to be pressure on Hamas last Thursday when Israel said it was going to go into Rafah. It's all been flipped on its head now, hasn't it?
Well, certainly some of that leverage was undone by America's open admission that it's withholding arms. I think that Hamas is very encouraged to see that level of division between the United States and Israel. But Israel still has leverage, and it's going to, I expect it to continue to start increasing that leverage in a phased manner if these negotiations remain stuck. We have an entire IDF division that's in the staging ground outside the Gaza Strip waiting for the order to move into Rafah. We know that the IDF can move hundreds of thousands more Gazans out of Rafah to the Al-Mawasi humanitarian area and to Khan Yunis. So the IDF has the ability to continue to increase that pressure. Now, the goal here is double. It's increase the pressure and at the same time disband Hamas's last stronghold. It's a very difficult thing to do both of those things at the same time, but it's entirely possible. And I think that that's the direction we're going to see things moving in until the leadership of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, and the senior leaders, maybe, they have to really hear the tanks over their head and hear maybe special forces around them before they say, okay, maybe I'll take that 4-week ceasefire.
Okay, all right. And that last stronghold, as Yaakov told us, is just across the border, of course, from Egypt. Cairo has warned Israel repeatedly not to go into Rafah. Let's talk now to Haitham Hassanein, adjunct fellow at the FDD. Thank you very much for being with us, Haitham. Good to see you. First of all, Egypt, like Israel, is a major US ally. I'm wondering how this cutting or this pause of military aid to Israel by Washington is being read in Cairo.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Well, this reminds Cairo of its experience with the Obama administration a decade ago when it froze military aid to the country after the army overthrew Muslim Brotherhood leader Mohammed Morsi. At the time, the country was fighting ISIS in Sinai and was desperate for an American military assistance. So such a move by the Biden administration toward Israel enhances the sentiment in Egypt and other American-friendly Arab capitals that Washington doesn't stand by its allies till the last minute and could ditch them at any moment, especially after seeing what's happening nowadays with its closest ally in the region, Israel. In the Arab eyes, this is something that no, with the Biden, they withdrew from Afghanistan and were reluctant to Ukraine in its war against Russia. And the era of great power competition, this will make them likely lean toward China in the aim of being more convenient and diversity of foreign power, even though they are certain Washington is still an option.
And Haitham, we've spoken in the past, haven't we, about Egypt's interest in keeping some of the smuggling tunnels with Gaza operational. Is there a concern now that the IDF is about to move in and shut those tunnels down?
Yeah, to be fair, I wouldn't say all of Egypt, but some corrupt members of the security establishment in Egypt alongside their counterparts in the business sector. Surely they wouldn't like the IDF destroying tunnels since we benefited tremendously from the smuggling business for years. It will be a huge embarrassment for Cairo once the IDF starts making more announcements and giving more details about secrets of these tunnels alongside
And how is President Assisi managing to justify Egypt's long-standing and very strategic relationship with Israel in the face of mounting pressure from his own population, especially when we see more images coming out of civilian suffering in Rafah?
The president himself doesn't talk about the relationship with Israel much, but nobody in Cairo in general talks about the strategic relationship between the two nations at the time. The majority in the country watch Al Jazeera propaganda and believe it, and even pro-government elite circles glorify actions by him. The few who dare to speak out will likely face societal backlash. So it's a sad time for Egypt-Israel relations at the moment.
Haitham, thank you very much indeed. Haitham Hassanein there at the FDD. And Ruth, you worked in Cairo. You know how there is a kind of difficult balancing act that Egypt has in terms of its very important relationship with Israel, but of course a population that is deeply hostile to the Jewish state.
First of all, there's a dichotomy in Egypt, as there is in Jordan, regarding the understanding that it's very instrumental to have a good strategic relationship between the two countries for the purpose of keeping some kind of stability, let's call it that way, in the Sinai Peninsula on the one hand and in the Gaza Strip. And so to make sure that this instability in the Gaza Strip doesn't leak into the Sinai Peninsula. And there were attempts by ISIS and other local extremist movements to try and create some kind of terrorist cells in the Sinai Peninsula, something that the Egyptians used and were helped by the Israeli intelligence in terms of information, but also in terms of allowing them to open the peace agreement and have more weapons and presence, military presence in the Sinai Peninsula, as opposed to what was allowed for by the peace agreement between the two countries. This was allowed and is still allowed by Israel in order for the Egyptians to be able to fight off terrorism. This is key for Egypt. On the other hand, the Egyptians did not do enough in terms of educating their own population, approximately 100 million people within the Republic of Egypt, vis-a-vis what is Israel, the inclusion of Israel in the region, to take out all the anti-Semitic rhetoric.
As they've done in the UAE, for example.
As they've done beautifully in the UAE. They began in Egypt to do this in the elementary schools, but they stopped. The middle schools and the high schools still have a lot of anti-Israeli and anti-Jewish rhetoric and messaging, as do many other organizations like the professional syndicates, the universities, and so on. And this is something that needs to change. Not only Israel must do things for the benefit of other countries, which is important, and I side with that, but the other countries need to take prominent and practical steps to change their own education vis-a-vis Israel and the Jewish people.
And just briefly, Yaakov, could Egypt complicate Israel's efforts to take control of the Philadelphia corridor?
I don't think that it will rush to complicate that kind of operation. I think what Egypt wants to see is that Hamas personnel and Gazan civilians are not spilling over into Sinai. They're worried about destabilization. They're worried about infiltration. Let's just recall that Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the sworn nemesis of the Sisi government. So they definitely have reasons to want to keep what they call Gazan trouble out of their territory. That's their main prerogative. I think everything else is just sort of acrobatic, rhetoric to try and retain legitimacy domestically as this war rages on.
Okay, thank you both. Well, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll head to the north of Israel, where the town of Shlomi has come under attack from Hezbollah rocket fire today. More on that next. Stay with us.
Israel is in a state of war.
Families completely gunned down in their beds. We have no idea where is she.
As our soldiers are fighting on the front lines, but the general perception is something that certainly needs to be fought as well.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en I24 News.
Welcome back. 4 members of the Iranian-backed Lebanese proxy Hezbollah were killed in an alleged Israeli airstrike today in southern Lebanon, and sirens have been blaring across Israel's northern communities today as well. Several rockets were fired from Lebanon, sparking a fire in the town of Shlomi, which is close to the border. We can get the latest on all of that now with our correspondent Zach Anders, who joins us from the north of Israel. Zach, a lot going on today. Just tell us what's been happening over the past 24 hours.
Man, this has been a very busy week, and we are seeing 2 separate barrages of what appeared to be multiple launches, drones and rockets, taking place at both 5 and then again at 5:30. From what we've been able to gather, no official word of casualties. There might have been some light damage. We're still waiting on the official word from both the Regional Council and the IDF. This does appear that potentially could be in response, Hezbollah attempting a larger barrage for the targeted strike that took place today in southern Lebanon. Lebanese media reporting as many as 4 people were in the car that received the airstrike and were killed. We have some video on scene from some Lebanese journalists showing the vehicle totally engulfed in flames by the time the first responders arrived. It is believed that they are Hezbollah affiliated, although we don't have official word on this from the IDF or on the purported strike taking place in Damascus. Also, no word there. We just continue to see similar statements to what we saw yesterday from the IDF, that they are striking, quote, Hezbollah terror targets all throughout southern Lebanon.
We're hearing that drones were sent across the border from Lebanon today. Any more detail on that?
Yeah, that was that barrage at both 5 and then again at 5:30. And it does appear that there's some evidence of successful interceptions. We can't say for certain at this hour what exactly was in the air that was intercepted. Also, that hit outside of Shlomi, that you can see some of the smoke in the hillside there. Again, this last week, if it's proved anything, it's how these drones are still able to get through the air defenses here. That's what's killed those soldiers earlier in the week and continues to be a serious threat, even though the IDF has put such an emphasis on killing some of the Hezbollah officials responsible for overseeing Hezbollah's aerial units.
Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there in the north of Israel. With me in the studio this hour, Ruth Wasserman-Lander, former MK and former diplomatic envoy in Cairo, and Yaakov Lapin from the Miriam Institute, the Alma Center, and the Jewish News Syndicate. And Yaakov, we were speaking before the break, weren't we, about the implications of that move by Washington to halt weapons supplies to Israel. You were talking about the impact this might have on the war with Hezbollah, which of course is dragging on for 7 months now, tens of thousands of Israeli civilians unable to return to their homes. Just talk us through what that might look like from here on out.
Well, we are still stuck in the same holding pattern that we've been in since the 8th of October, the day after that mass murder attack by Hamas, when Hezbollah joined in but kept its attacks limited geographically. And we've seen, occasional turning up of the volume button and then turning it back down in line with various developments. Now it seems that Hezbollah is escalating its attacks because of Rafah. It's trying to signal its solidarity with Hamas. But again, it's making sure that it's not going too far from its perspective. It's not firing rockets at Haifa, for example, which would be a severe escalation. And, we're not even close to a situation where they're firing at central Israel. So essentially the ball is in Israel's court, and Israel's choosing to do exactly what Hezbollah is doing, which is keeping this conflict limited. So yes, There was an assassination of 4 Hezbollah members. That's not what's going to change the equation. Hezbollah is an army, and an army knows how to absorb losses like this. It's lost around 300 personnel, and it's firing at will today. Its capabilities remain intact, and there's a major strategic dilemma. The war cabinet has to decide once the Rafah stage of this war comes to an end. Assuming that things don't escalate before then, they will have to decide, will they go for a ceasefire and leave Hezbollah in place, because any diplomatic agreement will be a false agreement and will not affect Hezbollah's presence in southern Lebanon, its entrenchment. It's impossible to uproot them through an agreement. That's
again not a view shared in Washington, is it? All of the pressure is on Israel to accept a diplomatic solution with either Hamas or with Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, it should be said, has just turned down another proposal from the French.
I would dare say that in Washington, they're perfectly aware of the fact that a diplomatic agreement will not change the reality on the ground in Lebanon, but they still want Israel to enter into one anyway, because they think, first of all, it's in their interest to avoid a northern war, because that could escalate and involve Iran, and that could drag in the Americans. So from their own security interests, they've concluded that they need to essentially extinguish all of the conflicts happening in this region from the south to the north. And now what needs to be discovered is what Israel thinks about this. Does Israel want to go to a ceasefire? My suspicion is that the answer is actually yes. I think it does want to go to a ceasefire. Would northern residents accept that kind of scenario? I suspect that the answer is no. So we have a lot of unknowns. And we'll have to see how this plays out. But for now, we are still stuck in the same holding pattern, and there's no sign of it changing. And unfortunately, families in the north are beginning to abandon the north, and that's a very sad development.
Do you agree with that, Ruth? Do you think diplomatic solutions with Hezbollah are just a non-starter?
Completely a non-starter. I just want to remind those who don't know that there are cities and towns on the so-called northern Israeli-Lebanese border that have basically Hezbollah members looking down into their living rooms, more or less, which is an absolutely insane situation that no country on the face of the planet that I know of would ever agree to be.
Because they were supposed to be, for those who don't know, they were supposed to be north of the Litani River under the UN Resolution 1701, which has never been properly enforced.
Absolutely not properly enforced. And in fact, this no man's land was supposed to give some breathing space, at least as a feeling, if not practically really operational, to the people that they're not living inside and within their own homes, basically. But this is the reality on the ground.
And Jacob, just to go back to the US weapons issue, I mean, would Israel be able to fight Hezbollah without US military support?
It would be difficult. I think it's possible, but difficult. We don't know what the size of the Israeli stockpile is. My assumption is that Israel has worked very hard with the United States until now to enlarge its readiness, enlarge its stockpile. It was way too small on the eve of October 7th. That was a huge strategic mistake. And now I think that the defense establishment in Israel is working very hard to enlarge it, mostly through hundreds of aircraft, cargo aircraft deliveries of supplies from the United States and dozens of ships. Also stepped up domestic production. I think that Israel would be well advised to look for alternative import options as well, cheap import options of things like tank shells, artillery shells. These are things that Israel can produce, but it's very expensive, and there are ways to procure this from other places as well. It's very important, I think, to diversify and build these kinds of insurance policies. When it comes to aircraft, that's going to be all the United States. There are no options here right now on the table. But Israel, makes its own tanks, makes its own armored personnel carriers. It's a very complicated situation. Again, if this unofficial arms embargo continues, it will negatively affect Israel's readiness in the north.
Okay, all right. Thank you both. Well, Syrian state media is reporting that Israeli jets struck a building in southern Syria close to Damascus this morning. The assassination of a senior Iranian general in Damascus last month triggered an unprecedented missile attack from Tehran and concerns of a wider conflict. The US back then warned Israel not to respond, you'll remember. Well, for more on that, we're joined by Joel Rayburn, director of the American Center for Levant Studies and a former US Special Envoy for Syria. Good to see you, Joel. Thank you very much for being with us. And there had been reports recently that Iran was pulling resources out of Syria because of the threat from Israel. Does it look, in your view, as though that is happening?
I never take those things. I always take those kinds of reports with a grain of salt because I think the Iranian regime is committed to maintaining a strategic posture in Syria. They may make some tactical withdrawals to try to reposition some of their assets, some of their personnel, especially after the strike that took out the senior IRGC generals a few weeks ago. It makes sense entirely that the Iranians would pull some of their more senior people out or move them to safer locations, more distant locations. But they're not going to see that strategic depth in Syria. They've worked too hard over too many years to establish it to just back away from it.
Your view on the decision by the Biden administration to cut or pause military aid to Israel, will that have an impact on Israel's ability to fight Hezbollah? And what are the strategic implications for the United States in this part of the world?
I think it's catastrophic for the United States. I think this is it's the encapsulation, it's the culmination of more than 3 years of an absolutely wrong-headed, misguided, failed foreign policy across the board. It's not just with respect to this conflict that the Iranian regime began and has been waging against Israel and the United States and other U.S. allies in the region. It also extends to, I think, the Biden administration's mistakes concerning Ukraine in 2022, the absolutely insane abandonment of Kabul. And, you know, chickens are sort of coming home to roost on the entire policy. I'm not surprised at the threat of an arms embargo from President Biden, but it makes absolutely no sense in the U.S. interest. And it's creating it's not going to stand in terms of the relationship between the administration and Congress. Congress is not going to go along with such an arms embargo.
Do you see Congress taking some steps to overturn this move? Can that happen?
I think that would come if it's put to the test. If it's really put to the test, especially with respect to if there's an escalation, a confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, I think Congress would intervene if the Biden administration tried to forestall some sort of Israeli action there. However, in the meantime, it's creating absolutely unnecessary friction. It's shooting the United States' interests and our allies in the foot. All it's doing is essentially signaling to the Iranian regime that the United States doesn't fully have the back of Israel as Israel tries to reestablish deterrence. The United States, obviously, the Biden administration has made a mistake in not restoring deterrence on our own. It's baffling to people like me that the American president doesn't every day, every hour, make an issue of the fact that Hamas killed more than 30 Americans on October 7th and still is holding 5 or more Americans hostage today.
And what about Iran's calculations here? Because we did see numerous attacks, didn't we, on US troops in Iraq, in Syria, and in Jordan as well, by Iranian-backed militia. Do you think that those militia might be emboldened now that those attacks had quietened down a bit of late? Do you think we might see a resurgence there?
Well, they'll pull out that leverage whenever they need it. The Iranian regime will, because I think the Iranian regime in its confrontation with the United States has been happening for the last several months. I think the Iranian regime has calculated that they've deterred the United States. They've deterred the United States on the Iraq front, the Syria front, and also on the Red Sea front. I think they believe that they've got the edge there, that they can act against our interests, they can attack our people, even kill our people, as they did at Tower 22 in Jordan, and with no U.S. response on the Iranians directly. That it'll always be the Iranian regime, I think, still is in the mode of thinking that concerning the United States, they can always hit us with the sock puppet, and that we'll only ever hit the sock puppet back. And that means that we're deterred, not them. So I think that's a very dangerous factor when we think about what the Iranian thinking about this Israel-Hezbollah potential confrontation in the north. Yes, it's a dangerous situation. The United States should be trying to reestablish deterrence so that the Iranian regime and Hezbollah will back away. And so far, that's not happening.
All right, Joel Rayburn, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.
And with me in the studio, Ruth Wasserman-Lander and Yakov Lapin. Do you agree with what you just heard? Is the US losing its deterrence in the region?
Unfortunately, yes. It's very hard to avoid that conclusion. Look, I don't actually believe in the notion of deterrence in the post-October 7th world to begin with. I'm not sure that jihadists can be deterred, but I think it's possible to influence their decision-making. And it's clear that the U.S. is very much clinging to the idea of containing Iran, containing its proxies. And again, it does not want to be sucked into a war in the Middle East, and it's broadcasting that very clearly to adversaries and allies alike. And that is a message of weakness in this region.
Absolutely.
That is going to be interpreted as weakness. And we see the results. The Houthis, the Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria, the Iranians themselves, Hezbollah. President Biden tells the Iranians don't, and they fire the largest barrage in recent military history at Israel. They very much do, totally disregard him. So the U.S. has very little sway right now in the region, and that's because it's signaling to everybody that it wants as little engagement as possible.
Which seems so far away, Ruth, from October 8th. When the US was right by Israel's side, we saw 2 airship carriers sent to the region, one visit after another, the president himself also visiting Israel. I mean, what changed?
I think that the closer we get to the elections in the United States of America, the less leeway the president feels. Of course, everything is subjective and analyzed by his own analysts, but feels that he has, and that affects the decision-making by the American administration at the moment. There is, in my humble opinion, a very poor analysis of the expansionism policy that Iran has adopted. We've only mentioned, the militias in Iraq and Syria and Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Hamas in Gaza Strip and the West Bank. And they're working to try and overtake Jordan and the Houthis in Yemen, and the cells that the Iranians are actually funding and encouraging in the United States of America, trying to take over the public opinion, not to mention Qatar and what it is doing with the Muslim Brotherhood in exactly the same manner, buying their influence because they don't have military might. And the fact that the United States of America is pushing away their decision-making, albeit we understand that there is an election season, is something that will have hugely negative repercussions on the entire international arena, because decision makers will become Iranian and Qatari, and we understand what that means for all of us.
Do you think the Biden administration was simply caught off guard by the level of public opposition to the war in Gaza?
I think there is an awakening, certainly, to the demonstrations, the very unbelievable organized way, and the fact that external factors are funding and organizing all of those premeditated, let's say, demonstrations and so on. They understood that there is already a platform in place in all of these campuses and think tanks and so on. I think that took the administration by surprise. But I must say, the United States of America and its administration has the best resources and best intelligence in the world. They must know, and therefore I beg to differ in terms, and again I say this humbly, but decision making, albeit we understand that there is election season coming up, will have horrific repercussions not only on Israel and the Jewish people, but on the Western world and American civilians in particular.
Jakob.
I agree. This is, essentially Israel here is a frontline state dealing with global jihadist forces perpetrated by Iran and its proxies, perpetrated by the Muslim Brotherhood. These are forces that have global ambitions. They say so as much. The Iranians want to expand their influence globally. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to set up a global Islamic caliphate. These are not some throwaway fantasies. These are actual strategies by jihadists that are being pursued day in and day out, and they directly threaten the interests of the United States, the entire Western world. So the default logical strategic position should be supporting Israel, asking what Israel needs, and we're seeing the exact opposite. It is a huge miscalculation, I think. I also don't know whether it will end up helping Biden politically or not. I don't have enough information on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if even that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you both. Well, let's talk about Iran, because an advisor to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, says that threats from Israel could push the regime towards pursuing a nuclear bomb. The Islamic Republic has always insisted it does not seek a nuclear weapon and that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. Fresh back from a trip to Tehran, the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, called on world leaders to adopt concrete measures regarding Iran's nuclear program, calling cooperation unsatisfactory. Well, joining us now, Ben Taleblu is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracies. Thank you for being with us, Ben. A pretty thinly veiled threat, shall we say, from this advisor, Kamal Karazi.
Pleasure to be back with you, Laura, and perhaps not so thinly veiled, because there's been a whole string of commentary, a little bit before COVID, but a steady string after, including a ton this year in the post-October 7 Middle East. This is simply the latest by Iranian political and military officials trying to dangle a nuclear sword of Damocles over Israel, over America, basically threatening massive expansion of their nuclear program and indeed weaponization of it. To be able to prevent or push back on any kind of perceived threat or real threat from Israel or America or any other external power. So this was the entire purpose of opposing Iran having domestic nuclear enrichment, a robust nuclear program to begin with, because it could at a moment's notice ramp it up and be able to issue precisely some of these threats. So my fear is we're going to be hearing a lot more of these threats, not less, anytime soon.
And the IAEA chief, Rafael Grossi, in pretty strong language for him, said that there was a completely unsatisfactory level of cooperation from Tehran this week. Has the international community just lost control now of Iran's nuclear program?
That comment by Rafael Grossi was expected, and indeed I think the trip in essence was a little bit unnecessarily and poorly timed. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's not worth someone like Rafael Grossi, who has gone to Tehran and tried for so many years now with spit and gum and glue to hold up the non-proliferation regime and to hold up the monitoring and verification regime that this government in Tehran is intent on gutting by death by 1,000 cuts approach. But when Grossi did go to Iran, it was coterminous with a massive nuclear conference, nuclear exhibit, you could say, by the Islamic Republic, where they, on the sidelines of that conference, an Iranian official indeed threatened to share nuclear technology with other states if they were subject to more pressure. So this is exactly not the kind of imagery you want for the Director General. It was predictable that they were not going to be able to revive the March 2023 agreement, and that was a political, not a legal or technical agreement. Moving forward, I think, unless the West gets serious at the Board of Governors and at the UN Security Council, the regime will understand that there are very few cards left for the West to play against the nuclear program, and you will have lost both hands off the wheel.
Can we imagine that Iran is feeling pretty emboldened by that decision by the Biden administration to withhold military aid to Israel?
Partially, but these things have a context. In general, the Islamic Republic is quite good about compartmentalizing the issues it has with newfound friends such as Russia or older friends such as China, where there may be issues of political or strategic divergence. It would be an own goal for Washington, particularly for the Biden administration, to ramp up and play up the differences between itself and its other regional partners and allies like Israel or like Saudi Arabia. So sometimes in this case, we need to take a page from our adversary's book and learn how they can compartmentalize some of their issues and build on shared cooperation, because I guarantee you there is tons more reasons for Israel and America to cooperate than for Russia and Iran to cooperate.
Ben Taleblu at the FDD, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, authorities in Saudi Arabia insist that the ambitious Neom project is still on track despite reports of delays. The $500 billion project is part of the Saudi Vision 2030. It's a plan to wean the kingdom off oil. Well, now there are reports in British media that police are permitted to use lethal force against people who protest against the project. Let's go to Dubai for more on that now. Our correspondent Bastien Bourri joins us. Bastien, tell us a bit more about what is in this report.
Well, the population targeted by the Saudi government is the Huwaitat tribe, which is scattered over several countries, southern Jordan, the Negev in Israel, Sinai in Egypt, and northwestern Saudi Arabia. It's hard to know how many they are, but these are people who have gradually abandoned their nomadic way of life to settle in villages, and at least 3 of these villages at the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba have been entirely razed. At least one villager has been killed and hundreds jailed for terrorism offenses because they simply opposed their eviction. So it's not a new story, but according to this report, this death was not a blunder. It was ordered by Riyadh. The whistleblower is a former Saudi intelligence officer exiled in London who now obviously fears for his life. He's getting all sorts of invitations from the Saudi embassy in London saying he really should come visit someday. And among the imprisoned Saudi villagers, at least 5 have been sentenced to death. And under international law, the UN recalls that states that have not abolished the death penalty, including Saudi Arabia, may only impose it for the most serious crimes. So if these reports prove true, it shows that Crown Prince MBS is prepared to kill to build Neom, which is a cornerstone of his vision of the future Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, they've certainly invested a lot in it, haven't they? But there are these reports, one after another, that it's hit obstacles. These new reports out today. I mean, is Riyadh willing to just scale it down at all?
Well, Neom has been met with skepticism and scrutiny. Some of its senior executives have jumped ship. Others are critical of the project's management. It will have an impact, especially since Saudi Arabia has a history of mega projects that have fallen short of their goals. I'm not going to name them all, but just take the Jeddah Tower, for instance. It was supposed to become the world's tallest building. It just now stands abandoned. And apart from what we just talked about, there are several factors working against the Saudis. First, the viability of the Neom project itself. We're talking about a 170-kilometer long, smart, linear, streetless city with a winter sport resorts in the desert, relying only on renewable resources to increase Saudi Arabia's non-oil generated wealth. However, Riyadh hasn't been able to achieve much success in attracting financial resources and investment from foreign governments and companies. As you know, there are also environmental issues, political issues with the Houthis in Yemen threatening to attack the city, and economic issues as well with Aramco, this gigantic Saudi oil company who's backing the project and who's suffering from a big drop in profits this year. So yes, that's why Riyadh will have to scale it down.
All right, Bastien, thank you very much. Bastien Borghi there in Dubai. Well, we're out of time. I'd like to thank my guests, Ruth Wasserman-Land and Jakob Laffin. Thank you to you both. Thanks to you for watching, and do stay with us here on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is up next with all the very latest.
Tel Aviv is ranked the happiest city in the world and the best place to own a home. For 3 generations, the Ben Shalom family has built boutique apartment buildings in the most desirable locations. From restoration in historical locales to homes along Park HaYarkon, Ben Shalom is a one-stop shop from start to finish and friends for life.
Esta semana en News 24, Israel bajo ataque. News 24 en español trae el análisis y la información de los acontecimientos de la guerra Espadas de Hierro.
Entrevistas exclusivas, reportes desde la zona de guerra, la reacción de los países hispanoparlantes.
News 24, el único medio en español que te mantiene informado y conectado con la comunidad latina en Israel. News 24, únicamente en i24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 216 of Israel at war, and the focus today is the impact of that conflict on relations with the United States. After President Joe Biden said he is freezing the delivery of some offensive weapons to Israel in order to prevent American-made bombs from being used against civilians in the IDF's offensive into Rafah. Israel's War Cabinet and Security Cabinet are meeting this evening to assess the impact of that decision. In the meantime, operations in the eastern edges of Rafah are continuing, with the IDF saying some 50 Hamas terrorists were killed in combat at Gaza's southern tip. Biden's decision has drawn heavy criticism in Israel and also in Washington from both Republicans and many Democrats. Senior correspondent Bianca Zanini has more.
Hundreds of protesters marching through Tel Aviv, demanding the Israeli government close a ceasefire deal with Hamas and halt its military operations in Rafah and Gaza, the last Hamas stronghold in the Strip, where many of the hostages are believed to be held. It's also the current home of over 1 million Palestinians displaced from the war. This Wednesday, in an interview with CNN, U.S. President Joe Biden said if Israel launches a major operation in Rafah, as it has promised, he will block the delivery of weapons like artillery shells and bombs for fighter jets that Israel could use in an assault on urban areas of Rafah.
And I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
This after the president paused a shipment of 502,000-pound bombs to Israel last week. Biden said Israel has used American-made weapons in deadly attacks in Gaza, which have also killed civilians. He ensured that the U.S. would continue to support Israel and provide defense, but warned it not to cross a line.
Israel shouldn't launch a major attack into Rafah without accounting for and protecting the civilians that are in that battle space. And again, as we have assessed the situation, we paused one shipment of high payload munitions. And again, I think we've also been very clear about the steps that we'd like to see Israel take to account for and take care of those civilians before major combat takes place.
The president's threats to halt the weapons supply to Israel in a time of war has caused anger and disappointment in Jerusalem, including from far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who wrote on social media, "Hamas loves Biden." Also domestically in the United States, the president is being criticized by Republicans and pro-Israel Democrats.
This is obviously an extremely challenging situation. I think the last thing we ought to be doing is telling our Democratic allies you ought to have an election or you ought not to conduct this war in a certain way.
President Biden's comments are the toughest warning yet to Israel that the support of its closest, most significant ally is not unconditional.
Well, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim in New York. Mike, that decision by President Biden, I should just mention, Prime Minister Netanyahu just a few minutes ago released a new video towards Independence Day in Israel, saying Israel, again, as in the War of Independence, would have to fight on alone. And, of course, plenty of blowback there in Washington from some Republicans and Democrats as well.
Netanyahu said it today. Menachem Begin told Biden to his face many decades ago, famously, that if Israel had to go it alone, it would do so. There is tremendous blowback to this decision from President Biden today, mainly because, at least in my view, this is a political decision from Joe Biden. I think he's seen the poll numbers. I think he's seen the protest out on the streets. And he's made this decision today based more on politics than on military policy per se. His administration has said time and time again, to much criticism, by the way, that Israel has conformed within military law, international humanitarian law, that Israel was taking and heeding American advice on military matters, that it took humanitarian concerns into account. I mean, this has been said in 1,000 different ways by 100 different officials in the Biden administration, and now suddenly today, with no investigation done as to Israeli violations, it's a preemptive action saying we essentially think you are going to commit these violations, and so we're not going to give you the opportunity. This is even different than President Reagan withholding cluster munitions from Israel during the Lebanon war, because at least there was an investigation then showing some violations of the usage. So this is kind of uncharted territory here, and at most perilous time, with the message that it sends to Hamas, with the message that it sends to intermediaries, to Iran, as to exactly the United States position here. And I think that's why it has so many up in arms, not to mention the fact, by the way, it was Joe Biden, and rightfully so, who was castigating Republicans for holding up aid to Israel during these last few months because of political gamesmanship. Well, now Republicans are throwing that accusation back in the president's face today.
Right. Former President Donald Trump, certainly among them, and again, lashing out at Joe Biden and Jewish voters in America who support him, according to former President Trump. Mike Wagenheim, thank you for that. Well, with us in studio, we have Reserves Major General Eitan Dango, former military secretary to 3 defense ministers, former co-Godhead, and Ambassador Danny Ayalon, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., former deputy foreign minister, now chairman of Silver Road Capital. We should mention, Danny, just in the last few minutes, John Kirby, the White House spokesperson, trying to deflect some of the blame for this decision, saying we tried to work with Netanyahu and the Netanyahu government, come up with a plan for Rafah. We've given them warnings. We're still going to give defensive weapons for Iron Dome. But this is an unprecedented step, at least the timing of it.
It is unprecedented because it's really in a time of war. During Reagan and Begin, it was a totally different situation. There was also some delaying of shipments during Rabin time and Ford back in 75, 76. But this is different. This is different, and it's unfortunate because it's so blatantly political decision. And I think at the end of the day, Biden will lose both ways, because if he wants to appease the progressive Democrats or the Muslims in America, I don't think that's enough what he did. And on the other hand, now he is really bringing on the Jewish votes and the pro-Israeli lobby, and they are still very, very strong politically. And but if you look at it, this decision is a very, very miserable decision. It's not going to affect the military operation. We'll hear from General Dangot in a minute, because it's only one shipment which is delayed. However, it is the signaling to the rest of the world that there is now a daylight between the United States and Israel, and many other countries can follow suit. Britain already said that they are thinking of holding shipments of some spare parts that they are sending to Israel. So this is not what you would expect from friends, but mostly it is, if Biden's or the Americans' interest is to shorten the war and finish it, this is going to actually prolong the war, because everybody here in all the bad actors, Hezbollah, Iran, of course, and Hamas, will toughen up and will say, all we need to do is just continue the war until Israel succumbs to the political pressure.
All right. Well, again, also Kirby saying the U.S. would continue to defend Israel against other players in the region, like Hezbollah, like it did with Iran. But Eitan, what about the security impact of this decision, even if it's, Danny says, not something that would immediately impact an operation into Rafah?
Listen, I think that United States realized that their strategic mechanism that they built crashed already the third time. In a very short time, they tried to bring a ceasefire, release of hostages, and quiet to all the area. And their main efforts were in this time, in this round, while they exchanged also Egypt instead of Qatar, and they came to this kind of suggestion. And I think that both sides, Israel and the United States, made a great mistake. Instead of sitting together on the answer of Hamas, realize together, United States smart enough to understand that the answer of Hamas was not as the Egyptian suggestion for the ceasefire and the release of the hostages. And I think the fact that Israel has started the operation to Rafah at the beginning on the simple place, on the crossing to Rafah, that was not got any kind of delegitimation, not from the United States, not from others. It came 24 hours later on. And this is the crash of this kind of what we are doing now. What does it mean? In my opinion, United States has no another program in order to make the ceasefire or to release of the hostages. It means that situation in the north will escalate in the coming future. I don't see now anybody that is dealing about the release of the hostages. You see what's going in Cairo. Delegations are leaving back. It looks like it's going down, at least for the coming 4 or 5 days after the independence day of Israel. It will move again. At that time, I think that the security situation, operation will continue. But the question is, what is the purpose now? The purpose that Israel declared was to force Hamas to change his answer on the agreement and to bring Hamas to agree about a release of the hostages. That was the purpose of the goal at the beginning. Now it comes to destroy Hamas structure in Rafah. We don't have any other opportunity. Going towards Khan Yunis, surround it, and that means increasing, escalate the way of fighting, and that brought Biden reaction. What has to be done instead of it, and even now, quiet from both sides, sitting together, because the impact will not be in Gaza. The impact will be in Hezbollah, Lebanon, and with Iran. The backwind that Hamas got is only a small example what's going now when Iran and Hezbollah analyzing the United States respond to Israel.
Well, as you say, seemingly the collapse of the hostage talks or what maybe set all of this in motion. And as you say, the mediators from Israel and Hamas left with no reported progress. Even though U.S. officials, some say that the CIA Director William Burns, they believe maybe an agreement could still be reached. For more, let's go to our Natasha Kirchak. She's outside IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv. And we see the demonstrators, a frustrating day, I can only imagine, an evening for them, Natasha.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been speaking with families of the hostages throughout the day. And listen, at this point, they're absolutely devastated. They're living in a state of despair. They feel that they have lost all hope in their own government in terms of securing a deal that's going to see their loved ones come home alive. As we know, 2 days ago, Hamas allegedly agreed to a ceasefire deal on a table. That was a deal that they had heavily changed, a deal that Israel is not willing to accept, that would see the first phase return 33 Israeli hostages, some alive, some dead. That's something that Israel says is not going to happen. We want that first phase to see all 33 of the hostages that we've agreed to see come home alive. And we also saw Hamas essentially saying that we're not going to agree to any deal unless there's a permanent end to this war. That's another sticking point for Israel, just not going to happen. You can see there are hundreds of people who are out on the streets today in Tel Aviv. They're not only calling for the immediate signing of a hostage release and ceasefire deal, but they're also calling for Netanyahu to take responsibility for the fact that he hasn't been able to secure the return of all hostages alive. Many of these families say that if he had just continued on with that November truce and it hadn't broken, we could have seen a lot more of the hostages who are now, sadly, most likely no longer alive, in captivity, returned home alive. So again, very, very desperate situation here. The families feel that no one's listening to them, no one's communicating with them. And after the news today that there really doesn't seem to be any kind of positive steps forward in seeing a deal actually made, you're just seeing even more of an upset on the street.
I could only imagine, really, after, of course, just a few days ago, we were talking about the real possibility of there being a hostage deal agreement in the near future. And now it seems to be receding. Natasha Kirchak there at the protest outside IDF headquarters. We know the Security Cabinet will be meeting there. Thank you for that. Well, let me ask you, Danny, is any possibility of the hostage, as I mentioned before, CIA Director William Burns still shuttling in the region, seems to believe even at this stage a hostage deal could be done, but has it gone too far, both in Israel's actions on the ground in Rafah and also now, of course, the relations with the U.S.?
I'm afraid if there was any...
Okay, hold on, Danny. We're going to the Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesperson.
Good evening. IDF is continuing with its activities in all the theaters. The GSS and the IDF have started in the Zaytun area in a campaign. They invaded that area after attacking from the air dozens of targets, and they would like to immediately stop this risk from that area for the State of Israel. We assassinated Ahmed Ali, the terrorist, yesterday. He was the commander there in Gaza, led a number of attacks against Israeli civilians during the war. And our combat planes also targeted the Hezbollah, the Nukhba terrorist leader in the Gaza Strip, and the various, and we have seen that the various divisions have continued and ensuring that none of the arms are being smuggled in. Hamas is using the Rafah passageway for terrorists. We found a number of tunnels and they are being screened at the moment, and we have killed over 50 terrorists in that area. During fierce fighting from the air and in the ground, they managed to kill that number of terrorists, and we're continuing with these activities. On the northern border over the last hours, there were warnings because of 2 UAVs actually infiltrated. We are immediately screening those various warnings, but ensuring that the civilians are able to reach safe areas. But we are doing so in order to truly secure the security of all the civilians in that area. Over the last few days, we killed 9 terrorists, the Hezbollah terrorists in Lebanon, and 115 targets were actually hit in South Lebanon. More than 20 Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon. These attacks were part of the effort in order to try and paralyze them and distance them from the borders. To our chagrin, there were also wounded and fatalities in our area. Staff Sergeant Chaim Sabach was killed, and Dan Kamhaji and Staff Sergeant Nathan Hertz were all killed. They were fighting.
גם הערב אנחנו זוכרים את המשימה העליונה ואת החובה שלנו לחטופות ולחטופים שעדיין נמצאים בעזה. אנחנו נמשיך וממשיכים לעשות הכל על מנת לייצר את התנאים
Our heartfelt condolences to all of them, and vis-a-vis the hostages, we are endeavoring to bring them home as quickly as possible, and we are in touch with the families. Is the IDF ready for a maneuver in the United States without that specific ammunition? And why was Ofer Winter released from the army? Yes, the IDF has all the munitions that they are planning and anything that we might possibly need. I am saying so in the framework of everything that was said in the talks with the United States. The United States has assisted us on a military basis in an unprecedented manner during the war. What is no less important is the military collaboration, and the Israelis for example, the Americans have collaborated with Israel vis-a-vis all issues and the threats from Iran, and they are in touch every single day and updating them about the challenges in the region. Even when there are contradictions and controversies, we solve these issues in camera, and we are listening and are attentive to the needs of the United States just as they are to our needs. You asked about Brigadier General Ofer Winter. He is an officer who has contributed immensely to the state of Israel. But it has been...
And that was Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. I have to say, Danny, he sounded more like a diplomat there and more like a politician than the diplomats and politicians who have been a little more defiant to the U.S. in the face of this decision by President Biden.
Kalev, my sentiments exactly. I was thinking the same thing. He really sounded like, the adult in the room, the responsible adult in the room, very politically suave, really actually not distancing himself from the United States, not criticizing any decision of the United States, but actually talking about all the good things that we do together. He mentioned, and it's one of the most significant things that happened after the Abraham Accords, and I think we discussed it here, Kalev, is that Israel moved from the EUCOM, the European Command,
to Central Command, which is this region.
Yes, which made it really a seamless military operation, which, as Daniel Hagari mentioned, really proved itself on April 14th.
Right. Now, he did mention the exchange of fire in the north. Let's go to Zach Anders, our correspondent in northern Israel. And Zach, another day of heavy fire after that overnight strike in Lebanon. Another blow for Hezbollah, apparently.
Yeah, and Hezbollah announced 3 additional deaths today, but I'm not sure that this is related to the strike that took place today. They had gone a week without announcing any fatalities within their ranks, and even going so far through their own media channel to claim that there had been no fatalities since May 1st. That does not correlate with the level of activity and the airstrikes that have been taking place in southern Lebanon since May 1st. And the announcement of those 3 that were Hezbollah's own announcement of the 3 today, I'm not entirely sure that that's related to this strike that Lebanese media is reporting killed 4 in their vehicle. We've got some initial video of the scene, but not really much to go off. We don't have any official confirmation from the IDF as to what the target was, if this was a high-ranking Hezbollah official. So still a lot of unknowns from today, considering how active the last few days have been. It has been certainly remarkable here on the north, as we've noted, these ebb and flow periods, and this is certainly one of the higher notes that we've noticed in this conflict.
All right, indeed, and certainly we may be seeing a lot more of that to come as Israel pushes on into Rafah in Gaza. Zach Anders in the north, thank you for that. I want to go back, though, to what Daniel Hagari said, Eitan, because also, along with the U.S., and being very diplomatic, highlighting IDF achievements there in the Rafah area, finding more tunnels, for example, on the Egyptian border.
Yes, but I would like to pay your attention that most of the words about the operational activity in Gaza were towards the north part of Gaza. In my opinion, by Israel achievement, the strategic asset of holding the north part of Gaza, this is the main card that Israel has in its hand to force Hamas to go for such agreement, because you succeed to control geographic area. And now the operation in Zaytun, in other places that he just mentioned, show you that Israel very anxious to continue its holding this kind of area. And in my opinion, Israel should not agree to any step by any Palestinian from the north, civil Palestinian, cross back to the north till the hostages are not returning. This is much more important card than Rafah. Secondly, concerning Rafah, he gave the situation where we are now to explain, as we spoke about Rafah crossing and this kind of area, and in also signal, in my opinion, the level of the escalation is not so high now. We are keeping, we are willing, we are looking for the future about the agreement. So he made it by his speech and emphasized the north part.
All right, and indeed, keeping control of Gaza in the north, as you say, one of the strategic cards that Israel still has, and still is engaged in combat in fighting some Hamas elements there in northern Gaza. Ambassador Danny Ayalon, General Eitan Dangot, thanks for joining us. We are going to continue, though, with our broadcast, the special broadcast, day 216 of Israel at War. We'll be right back.
I-24 News Channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds. De la frontière qui sépare Israël. The state of emergency and war in Israel.
Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 News Channels. Now on Hot.
Welcome back to this special edition of I-24 News, day 216 of Israel at War. Now, Hadar Hoshen was a beautiful young woman, inside and out, who met her end at the hands of brutal terrorists inside a bomb shelter at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th. Yesterday, her family and friends gathered at that site to not just mourn the loss, but to celebrate Hadar's all-too-brief life and her enduring legacy. Adam Bernitz has the story.
Heart-wrenching grief, taken too soon, a story to be told. Family and friends of Israeli Hadar Hoshen came together on Wednesday at the site of the bomb shelter near the Nova Rave Festival location at Neom, where she was murdered in Hamas's barbarous October 7th attacks. Hadar's aunt, Yifat, determined to keep the memory alive.
We decided to dedicate the day for her memorial. We came here, family and friends, and there is a big project of flowers. You see the red flowers, because usually the whole area is covered with beautiful blooming of red flowers in peacetime, but this year the blooming was gone, so people made from porcelain, they made those red flowers, and we came here to dedicate it to her and to say prayers and songs and even to cry a little bit because she deserved that. This is our day with her today.
Yifat has taken it as a primary mission and initiative, conducting tours for Israelis and foreign tourists alike, bringing them to the bomb shelter so that the world knows what happened to her niece and the other victims.
I have groups from all over the world, not only Jews. People come here in delegations, and people coming from here, Israelis, that want to get acquainted with the information and with the sites. And it's important, and that's why I promote it.
28-year-old Hadar was at the rave with 4 other friends. When rockets started to rain, Hadar, brave and proactive, led the way with other rave goers 2 kilometers away to the bomb shelter adjacent to the festival venue.
And she went inside like many others, and they were trapped here because they didn't know, they didn't realize that terrorists were coming in the roads, attacking people, bombing people. And as you can see the signs of the shooting here, over here, and behind you can see the signs of the grenade on the walls. And they were just bombing people, innocent people, with no way to protect themselves.
Hamas terrorists surrounded the shelter and repeatedly tossed grenades into the cramped and small concrete structure. Those who survived were seen thrown into the back of pickup trucks and taken into Gaza. Hadar was considered missing for 10 days after the massacre, until her body was finally discovered.
Our neighbors are not neighbors, they are our enemies. And in every normal Western country that would be attacked like this, the country would attack back severely and will end the violence against it. And I don't know why the world is not waking up, because one day it will knock on your door.
A shelter plastered with photographs of Hoshen's face that bear witness, marks from the grenades, curdling evidence of horror that took place. 133 Israeli hostages are still in captivity, their families' hearts yearning for their return.
May Hadar's memory continue to be a blessing. Now, that is one way of dealing with tragedy. Another is to try and create art out of the experience. That's the concept behind a new exhibition at the Museum of the Jewish People, ANU, which is located on the campus of Tel Aviv University. Titled October 7th, the exhibit features works created by artists who in various ways were touched by the terrible events of that day. Nicole Michel from our I-24 News Spanish show, News 24, went to see the exhibit with its curator, Michal Homanier, and filed this report.
Michal, when did you create the exhibit October 7th here at the Museum of the Jewish People?
It was triggered by October 7th. A few days later, we came back, the museum staff, and got orders to close the museum to the public. After 2 weeks, we contacted the Hostages and Missing Families Forum and began to work with them. We got many ideas to help spread information about the hostages in the world.
This is the result of a sad story, and there is the result of a story of Hatikva, hope.
We began to work with these hostages in parallel. We contacted the families of Raz and Inbar. Here at the corner of Raz Ben Ami, we have a happy story. The day we received this work, we received a message that Raz was returning after being captive in Gaza. A few weeks later, we heard of a most terrible loss. Inbar was murdered while she was kept captive by Hamas. It's a very sad story.
Ariel Kleiner is the guide of the Museum of the Jewish People and of this specific exhibit about October 7th taking place here. Ariel, thank you so much. I want you to tell us about the significance of art in difficult times, as is the war that began after October 7th.
Nicole, welcome to the exhibit about October 7th at Anu Museum. As you mentioned, it's very important to mention it is a great challenge to have an art exhibition when the event is still happening. What we will see here are different artistic expressions in response to the events of October 7th. Nicole, we are before a piece by Ziva Yelin. Ziva Yelin is a resident and artist of Kibbutz Be'eri, a kibbutz that was attacked on October 7th, and it's interesting to mention that this work exhibited here is from 2018. That is before the events of October 7th, 2023. We can see it's an image of Be'eri, and everything is red, which today represents something different to us because we make different associations.
Blood!
Exactly, very strong. And not only that, this work, as we can see, was attacked and damaged too during the events of October 7th. So we can say it's almost prophetic. This work was created by Lior Steiner. The last piece we saw had to do with all the kibbutzim. This one has to do with the Nova Festival, the music festival that gathered many youngsters to celebrate, which was invaded by the terrorists and suffered all the aggressions. What we see here is a piece called Akedah, the binding. We know the Bible story about Yitzchak's binding, how the patriarch Abraham performed the binding on his son Yitzchak. And here what we see is that binding. These two works are parallel, they have a dialogue, and show how she lost people who were dear to her, who attended the Nova Festival. Now I want to show you the art of Oren Fischer, a reaction to the events of October 7th. They are very moving. I find this art very touching, and we can see he wrote, "Let my people go," on all three of them. And we can see these three works, "May the kids come back home." At first, we think about October 7th and the many people who were kidnapped, including children, women, and so on. So that's one of the reactions. Here he says, "Since October 7th, we can't breathe. Please help us." And we can see the tears here as kidnapped victims. Finally, here, the signs that became known all over the world saying we are waiting for all the kidnapped people to return home. And we can see it reads, "We can't sleep." We really can't. And we can see the tear, representing all the tears we have.
It's amazing, Ariel. Art can be prophetic, right?
Certainly. We saw two things. That art can be prophetic, as you've seen, and also that art can be a response, and a creative one. Not just that. Many times, what art comes to do is therapy. Surely, for each of the artists who were able to express the feelings they had following the events of October 7th, this helped them in their healing process, if we can talk about healing in these difficult times. But at least to share and not let the pain remain inside, and it's very important for us to express.
Of course, and seeing the images as exhibited here, feeling and never forgetting where we come from and where we're heading to, it's important for the world to know that despite the pain, we have resilience. Resilience through art helps us build ourselves and re-emerge like the phoenix.
Exactly. I think the Jewish people throughout its history had many stories where we can observe highs and lows, in which we had to learn about resilience and always find inspiration in the past to flourish, as you said, and lead a creative life.
Now, in just a few hours, Adin Golan is set to take the stage in the semifinals of the Eurovision Song Contest in Malmö, Sweden, amid concerns of both crowd reactions and security. Golan will sing Israel's song entry titled Hurricane, or I should say retitled, after Israel was forced to rename and tweak the song from the original October Rain, after Eurovision organizers deemed that a too political reference to the October 7th massacre. Well, at last night's dress rehearsal, Golan was subjected to some loud boos from the crowd, although she garnered a little applause as well. Well, today, thousands of pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel demonstrators took to the streets of Malmö, waving signs with such slogans as "Welcome the Genocide Song Contest." Golan, who was under heavy personal security after receiving death threats, spoke with our correspondent, Christopher Barolin, who was in Malmö.
How do you feel like a few hours before going on stage?
Wow, I'm so excited. I cannot wait to go on stage and share a bit of myself and my energy and show our voice and represent our country. I can't believe this moment has finally come. And I kind of don't want it to go, but every end is new beginning. So I'm very excited.
How is the vibe backstage? We know that there is usually a lot of party vibe. How is it this year?
I mean, I like to keep it balanced. I like to be focused. I've gotten to meet quite a few contestants, and they've all been so nice. But yeah, I'm trying to take like the rest, focusing, rehearsing, and having fun. Having fun is very important.
We saw a lot of journalists around you coming to us. How is it feeling regarding what that has been said?
It feels like an honor to be here and to be the voice of a whole entire country and to represent so many people and people who aren't home and we need to bring them back now. So it means the world to me. I could have never imagined I would be in this place.
What can you expect for the semi-final first and hopefully for the final?
What can people expect, or what can I?
What can you?
I don't know. I just want to enjoy the moment. I want to give my all, and I hope to touch people's feelings and leave a mark.
What you would like to say to the viewers around the world that are watching I-24 News and may vote for you, will vote for you?
I would want to say a huge thank you to everyone and everyone who's supporting me and showing me love. It means the world to me, and it's so heartwarming. And if you want to, please vote 14, and hopefully Saturday again. And just thank you so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate your love.
Last question. Can you say more about the staging, how it's going to be? What all of the team think about?
I'll leave that as a surprise for tonight.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Eurovision is usually an event that Israeli fans eagerly look forward to, in this country having won that contest 4 times. But this year is different, with the changes forced on Israel's song entry, the anti-Israel protest, and the threats against Golan, giving Israelis a more sober view of the event. Here's some of their reactions.
We are all in Israel are heartbroken because of what happened on October 7th. And it adds up. We thought we are going for this escapistic, bubble, fun, campic, colorful, and then it bursts in our face. Another thing bursts in our face. So it's disappointing.
What Eurovision is all about is the unity and is putting everything aside and focusing on the art. And it has been so for so many years. So why should this year be different because we're at war? Like, this is part of our art. This is something we're very proud of. This is something the whole nation stands behind. We even, like everyone's involved in selecting the person. So I don't think there should be a difference. The world perceives it as like Russia attacked Ukraine, so now we're boycotting them, and Israel attacked Gaza, so it's fair to boycott them as well. But the situation is more nuanced and it's more complex because, like, we were attacked first, we were protecting ourselves. You can discuss like if the reaction was proportionate or not, but let's put that aside. I still think there's a difference between a country defending itself and a country that's invading another country just for invasion's sake.
Good luck, Adin Golan. It is disheartening to see those protesters there in Malmö. Of course, there are some prominent young influencers who have been working abroad to try to defend Israel in this difficult time. Among those who have been most active and prominent in their support of Israel and against anti-Semitism since October 7th is American Jewish New Yorker Emily Austin. She's back in Israel this week, and she'll be honored at a special Israel Independence Day event this Tuesday at Zappa Hayakon Park. Also an event featuring the singer Jasmine Moalem and the band Kadmon. And in studio with us, activist and sports media personality Emily Austin. Emily, first of all, thank you for joining us.
So nice to meet
and being in studio with us. Let's just start with your trip to Israel. Brought you back this time. And I know, looking at your Instagram, which has over 2 million views, you were down south today by the Gaza border. Tell us about that.
So JNF USA brought me to Israel. This is my second time visiting since the war, and I said, I'm traumatized enough from the kibbutzim. I've seen it. I did the hospital. What can I do to actually show the truth? You know, my whole thing is I always want to show people why I'm right and not tell people why they're wrong. So one of the biggest misconceptions going around in the United States is that we're starving Gaza to death. You know, we're not delivering proper aid. In fact, we're blocking the aid. Now, we can discuss, first of all, which we're not going to do right now, whether or not Israel has the obligation to even be providing the aid. But that's politics aside. So I went to the border, very close, as you can see.
Right.
I did not feel safe, but I was just like, I'm already this close. I might as well get closer. And I said, what are you going to say now? Because now I'm standing at the border of Egypt and Gaza, and I'm showing you that there's aid going in. So let's see the next narrative that I'm going to have to debunk. And it's almost like you could speak to deaf ears, because I post that, and they're like, well, the trucks aren't moving, so it's fake. And, you know, I just realized you're not going to change the minds of those who are just so set in their ways of hatred. But there's a large chunk in the U.S. that isn't showcased by the media that I want to show the Israeli viewers. You have that middle big 80% that's not here or there. And I hope that those are the minds that I can sway into not believing the misinformation online.
Right. You talked about not being safe there, and we know, again, Hamas attacked the Kerem Shalom crossing with rockets, which is where those trucks go through.
Right.
And you talk about speaking to people, and I've also, following your media, know you went up to Colombia. Of course, like myself, you're a native New Yorker, and I can only imagine your feelings on seeing some of those protests and parades going down the streets of New York City. Let's talk about that, because that's the narrative of the genocide, of denying humanitarian aid that's being pushed there, on the campuses especially.
All right, well, first and foremost, President Shafiq should be so ashamed of herself for always avoiding the root of the problem. Here's how I view Colombia's issue. The problem is that you have hate-filled, terrorism-loving students on campus that would rather support Hamas than support the only democracy in the Middle East. Now, the solution to this problem is for those that are on campus calling for the violence of Jews, that are literally not even hating on Israel or being pro-Palestine, but supporting Hamas in particular, instead of expelling these students, the same students who took an employee hostage and barricaded a building and occupied it, she would rather hire and waste the NYPD's time and remain there until May 17th, until after graduation, to reinsure the Jewish students' safety after they've already left because it's very much unsafe to be there. So it's like, rather than target the problem, which is misinformed students who think Hamas are the freedom fighters and the almighty that's going to save the Palestinian people, not realizing they are oppressing the Palestinian people, she'd rather protect those students and make sure the Jewish students feel safe, and that's an authority problem. You know, you can expect these students to be the dumb ones, but authority needs to step in at some point, and they just took too long, and it got to a bad point that there's almost a no return.
So the question is of what can be done, especially I'm asking you of young people. We should take note of the Columbia University students, the Jewish students, hundreds of them that just have now, just this week, released this statement affirming their Jewishness, affirming Zionists as part of their Jewishness. And we see individuals such as yourself, but what about your generation of young Jews and also those who may disagree? Is there a silent majority there, and should they be speaking out more in the way you do, or are they concerned about the kind of blowback that people like you get?
You know, I'm actually just going to say it straight. There are cowards out there that would rather stay silent in the face of evil, not realizing silence is complicity. At the same time, when I face the repercussions that come with defending Israel, losing job, losing sponsorships, literally becoming like unhireable for companies because of my politics, which are all pro-Israel, you know, I almost don't want to blame them in a sense. But then again, being silent in the face of evil is choosing the wrong side, because if you're not combating evil, you're almost okay with it. So to also counter that statement, I just got to Israel 2 days ago, and I've been posting on my story, and the amount of people who I would not expect, I'm talking celebrities, NBA players, everyone in between, that are showing support and writing how beautiful Tel Aviv looks and how they want to visit one day and how it's their dream to go to Jerusalem or Bethlehem or Nazareth. And I'm like, why don't you talk about it? Why don't you post that you want to go to Nazareth? Why don't you come? There's
so
enough
what's the response to this? So what's the response? I mean, we should mention.
Well, it's a war zone.
You should be mentioned. You're very active in the entertainment and especially the sports field, the sporting field, the work that has nothing to do with your work as an Israel activist or such, not directly. So do you have those conversations off camera with these people, and how do they respond? Even some of the Jews in the entertainment and sort of sports field and sports business.
Now, given that the sports industry does have a lot of respect between the athletes, the reporters, and everyone in between, it's easier to have the conversations. They're not like the Columbia students. I could give you a short story. One of the coaches from the Utah Jazz posted, this is pre-October 7th, Free Palestine. Now, I had a great feeling he had no idea what was going on. I called him on the phone. We had a very, very long conversation. And he heard the misconception that black people were not allowed in Israel. Now, that was obviously outrageous to me, who's been to Israel 100 times, but he was so willing to hear me out. He actually took down the post. He spoke to a lot of the NBA players on the Jazz. And I have those conversations, I'd say probably 2 to 3 times a month, depending on just the conversations going on behind closed doors. And they're usually very receptive, which is the side of, you know, the whole conflict that people don't get to see, the private conversations that really move the needle, which is why oftentimes I feel alone. Then I remember people might just be afraid to stand with Israel, even though deep down they believe in it, which is reassuring, but it would feel nice to have the support publicly when we face the scrutiny publicly.
Right. That's one side. Let me give you the other side, because you've become prominent engaging with anti-Israel and certainly in some cases anti-Semitic activists on the other side. Piers Morgan, you had a very lively debate that certainly got a lot of following. But at what point do you feel that you and others like you and with your sphere of public influence are giving some oxygen to those, let's call them what they are, not just anti-Zionists, anti-Semites in the public arena, places like, for example, the Piers Morgan show or other news shows?
My first 3, wow, that's crazy. My first 3 debates, 3 is 3 too many, but the first 3 debates I was on with the organizer of Within Our Lifetime, Nardine Kaswani. Right. In my book, she is a terrorist. You can cancel me a million times for saying it. She belongs in prison. She belongs in worse than prison. Anyway, I feel like if I wasn't there to combat the narrative, she would have been given the platform anyway to spew the misinformation. So that's one way to look at it. Now, my last debate on Piers Morgan was with this vile human being, Hassan, I don't even know his last name, a Turkish boy, who basically told me that this is propaganda and that the hostages are fake and that it's a political ploy to get attention, as if we want any of this. Like, trust me, I wish I did not have to be here right now in Israel showing my solidarity. I wish this conflict never started, and I wish it could end a lot sooner than it's going. And that's a conversation where it's like, why did I even do that? He was just cursing me out, calling me names, making fun of the hostages. And by me getting upset at that, which is reasonable, I'm giving them, like you said, the oxygen that they want, the reaction they want. And of course, the media, they need the clicks and they want it. But at this time, I feel like I gave it to them.
That's a double-edged sword.
It is a double-edged sword.
Using that. Okay, I do want to ask you about this Independence Day event, I understand, on Tuesday. And it's also, you're being honored at that. Tell us about that.
Yes, it's in Hayarkon Park. Wow, that was a mouthful. And Diplo Act coordinated this huge 2,000-plus person event to thank me on behalf of the State of Israel for my advocacy, which obviously, I mean, there's no great honor.
I should mention you worked also with the Israeli delegation at the UN.
Yes, a while ago.
Yes.
A lot of my confidence in being able to speak about the Hezbollah, the infamous word, is because I really realized at the UN, which kind of climate we're really in. You know, I really thought it was overrated by the media, but then basically shadowing Gilad Erdan 24/7, I saw firsthand what he deals with and his patience and his calmness and the way he speaks even to like our worst enemies in the UN. I learned a lot from that, and I don't know if I give enough credit where it's due, but I definitely learned how to combat people respectfully and always kind of choose the right way when it's so easy to just get angry and heated.
Right. Okay. We should mention those tickets are available for that. It's also a concert. Leslie, I do want to ask you, and as I mentioned, you have another side, which is as a sports media person. And I wanted you to talk about your next stop here, because that is a very interesting event in terms of the Middle East, where you're going on from here.
Yes, so I just started working for DAZN, which is a sports company, but in particular the boxing division. So my first fight ever was at Barclays Center,
professional boxing fight, yeah.
Yes, and my second fight ever that I will be hosting will be in Saudi Arabia. It'll be in Riyadh. Now, I thought, this is my misconception, I thought Jews were not even allowed in the country.
Not just Jews, but how about one who's very prominent in the media and social media as a Zionist and as an activist for Israel?
Right. I thought there was no way my visa would get approved. I said they're going to look at my Instagram, they're going to see 10 rows of pro-Israel content, and they're going to reject my visa immediately. But on the contrary, I have really cool meetings set up in Saudi Arabia. Everyone's very looking forward to meeting me. And I've seen multiple of my friends go to Riyadh. So again, I know how the media works. I'm on both sides of it, but it seems like they're almost friendly towards the Israelis. Now, I am a dual citizen.
Right.
I have my Israeli passport, and I have my American, and I know that they're just as excited as I am. They love to host. They're a great, very disciplined, respectable, honorable country. And I'm excited to see it, and it seems like they're happy.
Or maybe that's a glimpse of the new Middle East beyond what we're seeing on the ground here. And we should mention that's a championship fight, Tyson Fury.
Tyson Fury versus Usyk.
World heavyweight champion. Emily Austin, thank you for coming to Israel, the work you do on behalf of Israel, and of course,